Welcome everybody to our 10-minute table talk. I am Pastor Holman. Thank you so very much for joining us here today. I want to draw your attention to Genesis chapter number 1. And I want to speak to you from the subject of God's original design. And more specifically, God's original design for man. In Genesis chapter number 1, 31 verses, we find the name God mentioned 36 times in 31 verses. But there's only really two characters in Genesis chapter number 1. Actually, there is a main character and then a sub-character. The main character being God. And the name God that you'll find in Genesis chapter number 1 is the name Elohim. Elohim means self-sufficient. This is the self-sufficient God who operates within himself and needs nothing outside of himself to sustain himself. God is completely self-sufficient, and God needs absolutely nothing in order to thrive in his environment. God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-present. This is the name Elohim by which you see in Genesis chapter number 1 and verses 1 through 31. It is the all-sufficient God. We find that in the first 5 days that God does some magnificent handiwork. He creates the heaven, he separates the sky, he puts grass on the ground, he puts fish in the sea, he puts cattle on the ground. He does some magnificent painting on the landscape of humanity. But in Genesis chapter 1, verse number 26, he's about to perform his masterpiece. In Genesis chapter 1, verse number 26, then God said, "Let us make man in our own image according to our own likeness." In Genesis 1 and 26, God, Elohim, the self-sufficient one that needs nothing outside of himself to sustain himself, that same self-sufficient God said, "Let us make man in our own image according to our own likeness." The one that needs nothing decided by a free act of his will to create man in his own image and according to his own likeness. This is a very big deal because God who created the heavens, God who flung the stars against the velvet landscape, that God who put the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the cattle on the ground, is now deciding to make man in his own image. He could have made the cow in his own image. He could have made the dog in his own image. He could have made the butterfly in his own image. But he decided to do something completely different than what he had did the previous 5 days. God, by a free act of his will, decided to make man. And not only that, in verse number 26, he says, "Let them have dominion over the fish over the sea, over the birds over the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps up on the earth." So in the first 5 days of creation, God created everything. And then on the 6th day, when he created man, he gave man charge over everything that God created. We need to understand that man created nothing. God created everything, but God gave man the opportunity to rule over everything that he had made. Man has always been created to rule. In verse number 27, so God created man in his own image, and in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Verse number 28, watch this and don't miss it. Then God blessed them. And he said to them, again, the self-sufficient one, Elohim, said to them, who is to them, the man that was created in his own image and likeness, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish, over the sea, over the birds, over the air, and over every creeping thing that moves upon the earth. He told him in verse number 28 to be fruitful, but only Adam was created. He told him even in his embryonic state, even as he created him in the very first moment, to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. Subdue the very thing that I created, because watch this, God created the earth for human consumption. God created the earth so that the earth would yield its fruit in order to benefit man. And therefore God put man over everything that God created. But there is a problem. In Genesis chapter number 1, verse number 28, even though it is a perfect environment, God had asked Adam to do something that he himself was not able to do by himself. You see, Adam had no creative power. Adam couldn't speak something out of nothing. Adam couldn't do what God did in the previous verses of Genesis chapter number 1, because man does not have the power to create like God does. God gave him a command to be fruitful and multiply. But how was Adam going to multiply if Adam was the only man on earth? That was an assignment by which he could never fulfill because he was not equipped to fulfill it. God knew that. In Genesis chapter number 2, verse number 15, then God put man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and to keep it. And then God commanded the man, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. I want you to see what God is doing in Genesis chapter number 2, verse number 15 and following. God is giving Adam an assignment. And that assignment is based on what God told Adam in Genesis chapter number 1, verse number 26, to subdue the earth, to do what I've called for you to do. I've created it, now you keep it. In verse number 18, this is what he said. This is a very, very important verse. And then the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. Watch this. This is Genesis chapter number 2. Sin has not entered into the world. The sin entered into the world in Genesis chapter number 3. But yet God says unto man, in this perfect environment that I have created, there's something that's not good in this perfect environment. And what is that? Man is alone. God recognized the problem and God did something about the problem. He recognized that I've called for Adam to be fruitful and multiply. But yet Adam cannot be fruitful and multiply because there's nothing comparable for Adam to be fruitful and multiply with. Therefore, in verse number 18, here's what God says, I will, Adam, not you. I will do this, Adam. I will make you a helper comparable to him. God says, I'm going to do this. I've recognized the issue and I'm going to bring the solution to it. And that solution is to make a helper comparable to him. Now, why is that word comparable important? Because remember, God has called for Adam to be fruitful and to multiply duplicate Adams upon the earth for the purposes of subduing the earth. But Adam cannot make multiple Adams if he is the only Adam. Adam needs a helper that is comparable to him in order to bring to pass the vision and the destiny of God. So God created Eve. Verse number 19, out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field, every bird of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called that living creature was its name. So Adam gave names to all the cattle and the birds of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a helper that was comparable to him. I stress this word comparable because it is very important to the understanding of man's original design. We're living in a world right now to where the world is literally turned upside down. We're calling men who are genetically and biologically men, we're giving them the dual assignment of being called a woman. We're calling a woman who is genetically and biologically a woman and assigning her the title of a man. So we're actually living in a world where we believe men can be women and women can be men. And we are messing up the roles by which God has assigned. Nobody gets to choose their gender. Nobody gets to transform or transition from a gender. These are purposes and designed for God and designed by God in order to achieve a particular purpose. It is a reason why this word comparable is so important to the text, because Adam had to have somebody that was comparable to him physiologically. They had to fit. They had to fit in order to bring to pass Genesis chapter number 1, verse number 26. God could not have created another Adam because two Adams would have never fit. God did not make two Eves because two Eves would have never fit. Two Adams could never bring about Genesis 1, verse 26. Two Eves could never bring about Genesis 1, verse 26. And therefore, God had to make him a helper that was comparable to him. God's original design, what did he do? He put man in the garden, gave Adam a job. gave Adam a job before the fall of man. Work is not a curse from Genesis chapter number 3. Work is a reward. God gave Adam a job before God gave Adam a family. God gave Adam assignments before God gave Adam the duties. This is the plan of God before the fall of the world, before Genesis chapter number 3, when sin entered in. We're now living in a world to where the man does not know his godly assignment. And the godly assignment doesn't come from your homeboys. It does not come from your boss at the job. It doesn't come from what social media says. It doesn't come from actors and sports athletes. Your assignment as a man comes from God. Your assignment is to be the priest, provider, and protector. Men are given the role of carrying the load. It is a godly responsibility. But we're living in a time right now where men do not understand their assignment here on earth. And so they walk around aimlessly with no purpose, fulfilling no destiny. But once you understand the assignment that God has placed upon your life, you walk in it with the full assurance that God is walking with you. In Genesis chapter number 2, Adam had an assignment to fulfill. And hear this, God gave him all that he needed in order to fulfill the call that God had called for him to do. Whatever God has called for you to do, God will give you what you need in order to accomplish it. In Genesis chapter number 2, verse number 23, Adam said, "This is now flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. She shall be called one man because she was taken out of man." We're living right now in a very politically correct world where once the good, which was always good, is now spoken of as evil. The evil, which was always evil, is now spoken of as good. We're now living in that time to where everything is turned upside down. Man, if you're listening to me right now, do you know your assignment? Do you know what God has called for you to do? Are you walking in the authority that is the assignment that God has called for your life to do? If not, understand that God has a plan for you, and that purpose and plan that God has for you is so much better than the plan in which you're currently now living. Follow God, trust Him with your life, and watch God do great things. God bless you.